Shalom, everyone. I'm Ari, or as it's actually pronounced, Ari. I'm so happy to be here talking about Hebrew and Hanukkah and all things voice and speech.
Hi, I'm Kate Glasheen, and that gentleman who just greeted you is my special guest today, Ari Axelrod. You can learn more about him at ariaxelrod.com, and if you like today's video, please like and subscribe below. Let's get started. Sometimes as a dialect coach, I'm asked to teach actors to speak in languages they don't know. To do this, I consult an expert on the language, and since we're in the middle of the celebration of Hanukkah, I thought a nice way to explore this side of voice coaching would be to try to learn to pronounce a prayer in Hebrew, and that's where Ari comes in. Ari and I crossed paths several years ago when he was a student and I was a visiting professor at his university. He's now an actor living in New York and is known for his cabaret performance, A Celebration of Jewish Broadway. He's also the founder of Bridging the Gap, a company dedicated to educating the next generation of cabaret artists. Well, hi Ari, thanks so much for joining me today. It's really great to have you here and to teach us a little bit about Hebrew. And so let's just jump right in. Would you give us a little history and background about learning and speaking Hebrew?
Totally. So I lived in Israel for about 6 months when I was 2. And before my family and I lived there, I called my mom and dad mommy and daddy. And after we got back to the States, and to this day, I call my parents Ima and Abba. So the language that I learned there was really impactful. Well, so that's when I was first exposed to it. And then I went to Hebrew day school for elementary school, where it was an immersion school. So half the day was spent speaking in English and learning, language arts and social studies and history. And the other half of the day was spent speaking in Hebrew, to the point where if we would speak in English in the Hebrew half of the day, our teachers would say, in Hebrew, we don't understand what you're saying. We don't speak Swahili. So I learned Hebrew in school, but I was exposed to it when I lived there, when I was 2. So my dialect is much more closely related to how an Israeli, a native speaker, would speak. Whereas my brother, who was 2 years older than me, he was 4 when we were there, his dialect is much more Americanized. But what's interesting, there is a difference between modern day Hebrew that is spoken in Israel and biblical Hebrew that we recite in the prayers and that are, it's in the Torah. So modern day Hebrew only came about in the mid to late 1800s. Because one guy named Eliezer ben Yehuda, who was a Zionist, who believed that if the Jews can't have a land to call their own, then they might as well have a language to unite them. Because the language that was being spoken for, Jews in Eastern Europe was Yiddish, which was a mixture of German and Russian and then whatever language, where you were. And then for Sephardic Jews of, more Spanish-speaking descent, they spoke Ladino, which is a mixture of biblical Hebrew and Spanish, Portuguese, and whatever. So this guy created this brand new version of Hebrew that was meant to be conversational. It gets tricky because, my grandmother spoke Yiddish. That was her first language. So when she recites the prayers in Hebrew, it sounds very different than somebody who is Israeli, whose native language is modern day Hebrew.
Those are all the details that if I were consulting you on a production, we would need to know which of those things are relevant, how comfortable the character is speaking the language, what kind of dialect they would have. So do you want to just jump in and can we hear it first, the whole prayer, and then you can test me, see if I can do it?
So in the native Israeli, it would sound like this. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'hadlik ner shel Chanukah.
We'll see how I do. That was lovely though. So yeah, let's break it down for me bit by bit, and I'll just try to repeat it for now. And obviously, again, if I were learning this to coach someone else, we would take much more time. But for today's purposes, we'll just see if I can accurately repeat the sounds.
I will say that the 2 hardest sounds in Hebrew show up in this first word, which is just
fantastic.
So great.
So the first word has a uvular R, a pure uvular R. So Baruch.
Baruch.
Close. Think of like rolling your uvula, like a Chewbacca impression.
I can tell you now, this dialect coach can't do that yet.
Amazing. So
I'm gonna fake it.
Perfect. So Baruch,
Baruch. Oof, no. Baruch.
Ata,
Ata.
Adonai,
Adonai.
Eloheinu,
Eloheinu.
Melech,
Melech.
Haolam,
Haolam.
Asher,
Could you do that one more time?
Asher,
Asher.
Kidshanu,
Kishanu.
Kidshanu,
I missed the D. Kidshanu.
B'mitzvotav,
Oh, one more time.
B'mitzvotav,
B'mitzvotav.
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 So, B'mitzvotav,
B'mitzvotav.
V'tzivanu,
Oh, again.
V'tzivanu,
Vitzivanu.
Lehadlik,
Nehadlik.
Lehadlik,
Lehadlik.
Ner. Or, if you want to do the more Americanized version, it would just be Ner,
Ner.
Shel,
Shel.
Chanukah.
Chanukah.
Perfect.
Woof. Okay.
That was great.
No, that's so many just sounds that I just don't know. I'm just not familiar with, right? So, what would you say is the most difficult sound for a non-native speaker who's learning?
There are two sounds that are really difficult. The first one is the uvular R, which is r, but unlike French, which has a little bit of in it, like bonjour, there's no it's just r. So the Hebrew word for green is yarok, or my name, Ari. It's just a pure r. The second one is but unlike German, which is like more like it's like you're getting popcorn off of the back of your throat.
No, that was too forward. That was too forward. Do it one more time.
Yes!
Learning the sounds of a dialect or a language are the nuts and bolts of it, but there's more to it than that, right? There's tempo and rhythm and intonation and placement, and a lot of different things that make a speaker fully embody the sounds of that language. So is there anything like that we should consider?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, this prayer is normally sung.
Ooh.
So when it's spoken, which is not that often, it takes on a completely different rhythm and melody and pitch and everything than it takes on when it's sung.
Would you mind singing it for us?
Of course. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik ner shel Chanukah.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, this was so lovely, Ari. Thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your faith and culture and language. And I wish you the happiest of Hanukkahs, my friend.
Thank you. This was so much fun. I'm so happy that we got to do this.